Ancient manuscripts reveal Jesus left a karmic liberation code called Yehav. For 2,000 years, billions of people have recited the words of Jesus in churches, cathedrals, and private prayers without the faintest awareness that the most powerful liberation technology ever encoded into human language was hiding in plain sight inside a single Aramaic word they were pronouncing without understanding. That word is Yehav, and its meaning is not what any translation you have ever encountered has told you it is. Ancient manuscripts preserved in the monasteries of Syria, the Coptic libraries of Egypt, and the Aramaic scriptural tradition of the early Eastern Church consistently document Yehav as a specific vibrational formula for the dissolution of karmic debt, a technology so precise in its mechanism and so threatening to every system of institutional spiritual control that the Church Fathers who assembled the canonical Bible worked with extraordinary deliberateness to reduce it to a simple verb, meaning to give. The historical evidence for this encoding is specific, multiply attested, and preserved in sources that had no contact with one another. Which means what this channel is about to present is not spiritual speculation, it is documented historical record. And tonight, for the first time, you are going to use it exactly as Jesus intended. The most historically significant appearance of Yehav in the documented teaching of Jesus occurs in what the canonical tradition has rendered as "Cast your burdens upon the Lord and come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," in both cases. The operative word in the original Aramaic is Yehav. And in both cases, the English translation has reduced a specific, energetic protocol for karmic liberation to a vague spiritual encouragement that produces, in most of the people who receive it, precisely nothing in the way of actual release. The historical record on what Yehav actually meant to the Aramaic-speaking communities who first received this teaching is substantially more precise than the canonical tradition has ever allowed the general public to understand. Elaine, Pagels, whose Princeton scholarship on the Gnostic Gospels brought these texts to the attention of the wider academic world, documents in the Gnostic Gospels how systematically the early church worked to eliminate every teaching of Jesus that described direct, personal, unmediated access to liberation. Access that required no institutional intermediary, no sacramental permission, and no ecclesiastical validation. The Yehav teaching was among the most aggressively suppressed because it was among the most practically powerful. A soul that understood how to apply Yehav correctly had no structural need for a church that positioned itself as the exclusive administrator of divine forgiveness and karmic resolution. The institutional threat was existential, and the suppression was proportionally thorough. If these Gnostic teachings are awakening a desire for inner transformation within you, we prepared the guides on the sacred words where this journey begins. The link is pinned in the comments. The historical documentation of Yehav as a karmic liberation technology does not rest exclusively on the Gnostic textual tradition. It extends into the broader comparative study of ancient wisdom traditions that were contemporaneous with the teaching of Jesus and that independently developed strikingly similar understandings of the mechanism through which sound, intention, and vibrational frequency interact with the energetic architecture of karmic patterning in the human soul. The Sanskrit tradition of mantra, in which specific sound sequences are understood to operate directly on the karmic field of the consciousness that employs them, dissolving accumulated energetic debt through the sustained application of precisely calibrated vibrational frequency, describes a mechanism that is structurally identical to what the Aramaic mystical tradition documents for Yehav. The convergence is not coincidental, and it is not the product of cultural borrowing. It is independent attestation of the same underlying reality from two separate ancient traditions that arrived at the same conclusion through entirely different investigative paths. The specific linguistic architecture of Yehav, the precise way in which its Aramaic sound structure encodes the karmic liberation mechanism that Jesus embedded within it, has been documented with scholarly rigor sufficient to reconstruct its essential operation with reasonable historical confidence. The word is built from 3 distinct Aramaic phonemic components, each carrying a specific energetic function that contributes to the overall mechanism of the complete word when spoken with full conscious intention. Understanding these components individually before understanding how they function together is the key to using Yehav, not as a religious word to be recited mechanically, but as the living vibrational technology that the historical teaching of Jesus intended it to be. The first component that carries the divine root sound that permeates Aramaic mystical practice, and that Douglas Klotz identifies in his scholarly commentary as evoking the breathing source of all life. This is not a theological abstraction. It is a specific acoustic event with a documented physiological correlate in which the resonance of the divine root sound, when produced with conscious intention in the vocal apparatus, activates a state of inner coherence that academic researchers in the field of psychoacoustics have begun to measure and document with increasing precision. The second component, ha, carries the Aramaic breath sound associated with the release of what is held, the exhalation that accompanies the setting down of a weight that has been carried beyond its appointed duration. The third component, AB, carries the Aramaic root for father, source, and the ground of being into which what is released is received, not lost, not destroyed, but received by something infinitely larger and more capable than the soul that was carrying it. Together, Yehav, spoken with full conscious intention, performs a complete vibrational sequence, the recognition of the source within the self, the release of what the self has been carrying beyond its appointed season, and the entrusting of the released content to the ground of being that is both the origin and the ultimate destination of everything the soul has ever carried. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Cast your burdens." The English word cast is a pale shadow of the Aramaic, Yehav, which does not simply mean to throw something away, but to perform a complete, intentional, energetically precise act of karmic transfer from the distorted field of the trapped soul into the infinite coherence of the monad. The historical documentation of this mechanism is preserved, the scholarly evidence for its precision is available, and the protocol for applying it is what this channel now presents for the first time in its complete, historically grounded form. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart, and you wish to explore it further, we prepared 2 guides that explain the first sacred words, where the journey begins, their layers of meaning, and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. The convergence of historical documentation, linguistic analysis, and cross-cultural independent attestation presented in this investigation leads to a conclusion that is both historically defensible and practically urgent, that Yehav is not merely an interesting Aramaic word with a richer meaning than its standard translation suggests, but a fully operational karmic liberation protocol that Jesus designed, encoded in his native language with the precision of a consciousness that had absorbed the most advanced vibrational wisdom traditions of the ancient world, and transmitted to his followers with the explicit intention that they would use it as a living practice rather than preserve it as a doctrinal relic. The institutional suppression of its full meaning was among the most consequential acts of spiritual censorship in human history, because what was suppressed was not a theological concept, but a practical tool for the liberation of the soul from the repetitive patterns of karmic imprisonment that constitute the primary mechanism of human suffering across every culture and every era. The historical evidence further suggests through the pattern of archonic distortion that the Gnostic texts describe with remarkable consistency that the suppression itself was not random. The specific targeting of the Yehav teaching among all the teachings of Jesus that the early institutional church worked to neutralize points to the precise degree of threat that a karmically clear human consciousness represented to the systems of control that the Gnostic tradition identifies as a soul that has learned to dissolve its karmic loops through the consistent application of Yehav is a soul that has removed itself from the primary mechanism through which those systems maintain their hold, the accumulated energetic weight of unresolved patterns that keep the decision-making capacity of the soul oriented toward repetition rather than sovereign creation. What Jesus demonstrated through his own historical presence, the absolute absence of karmic contraction in his decision, the sovereign authority with which he engaged every situation without the slightest evidence of the repetitive reactivity that characterizes karmic imprisonment, was not a supernatural gift granted by divine exception. It was the demonstrable, historically documented result of consistent, disciplined, lifelong application of the vibrational liberation technologies, of which Yehav was the most central and most practically powerful. The historical record makes this conclusion available. The linguistic evidence supports it with specificity, and the protocol that follows is the direct, practical application of everything this investigation has established. The full Yehav Karmic Liberation Protocol, reconstructed from the historical evidence of the Aramaic Peshitta, the Gnostic textual tradition, the scholarly work of Douglas Klotz, Lamsa, and Pagels, and the cross-cultural independent attestation of the Sanskrit and Zoroastrian parallel traditions, consists of 5 movements that Jesus embedded within the teaching and that can be applied immediately in the body you currently inhabit, in the life situation you are currently navigating, without any prerequisite of spiritual advancement, institutional membership, or doctrinal compliance. The first movement is what the Aramaic tradition calls recognition, a moment of complete, honest stillness in which you identify, without judgment and without the urgency to immediately resolve, the specific pattern that is presenting itself for liberation. This is not analysis. It is the simple, embodied acknowledgement that something is repeating. Place both hands on your chest. Breathe once, slowly and completely. Name the pattern internally. Not the story around it, not the history of it, simply the quality of it. Heavy, familiar, older than this situation. That recognition is the opening of the protocol. The second movement is presence. The deliberate orientation of the full attention toward the weight of the pattern as it is felt in the body right now. Not toward its history, not toward its future consequences, but toward the specific physical sensation of its presence in this moment. Where does it sit in the body? What texture does it have? This embodied contact with the pattern, without resistance, without the need to change it immediately, is what creates the energetic conditions necessary for Yehav to operate. You cannot release what you have not first fully acknowledged as present. The third movement is the spoken application of Yehav itself, spoken softly on a full, slow exhale, with the entire recognized weight of the pattern consciously placed in the sound as it leaves the body, not recited mechanically, not whispered as a request, spoken as an act, as the deliberate, sovereign, energetically intentional transfer of the karmic weight from the distorted field of the imprisoned soul into the infinite coherence of the monad. Speak Yehav 3 times on 3 consecutive exhales. With the first, you acknowledge the release has begun. With the second, you feel the weight beginning to move. With the third, you allow it to complete fully, without retrieval, without the anxious checking whether the release has worked. The fourth movement is the silence that follows the third repetition, held for a minimum of 60 seconds without filling it with thought, evaluation, or the habitual mental activity of the anxious decision-making mind. The fifth movement is gratitude. Not the performative religious gratitude of compliance, but the genuine, embodied recognition that what was just released was real, that the space now present is real, and that the monad that received the karmic weight is infinitely capable of transmuting it into whatever form of wisdom, healing, or redirected energy the soul most needs for the next chapter of its sovereign expression. This gratitude is itself a vibrational event. It seals the protocol and signals to every layer of the consciousness that the release is complete and the new ground is stable. Practice the Yehav protocol daily for 21 consecutive days, applied to whatever pattern, decision, or karmic weight presents itself in each day's experience. The historical evidence from the Aramaic and Gnostic traditions that document this practice consistently describes days as the minimum period required for the vibrational recalibration of the soul's decision fields become stable and self. What Jesus encoded in Yehav was not a one-time intervention. It was a daily practice of sovereign karmic liberation, the most historically documented, linguistically grounded, and cross-culturally attested spiritual technology for the dissolution of soul imprisonment that the ancient world ever produced. It was buried for 2,000 years. It is available to you tonight. And the only thing required to begin is a single slow exhale and the full intention of a soul ready to finally set down what it was never meant to permanently carry. Visit Divine Light Academy, my site dedicated to bridging ancient spirituality and modern living. There you will find my guides and a deep journey into Aramaic, the living language of the masters, designed to help you access states of deep resonance, clarity, and personal revelation. The link is pinned in the comments. Get ready! In the next video, I will reveal more sacred Aramaic words that unlock deeper spiritual understanding. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.